is actually a really unique conference. For the first time ever, we've been able to bring together a meeting of the regional International Society for Autism Research here in Africa, first time ever in Africa, combined with a meeting for child and adolescent mental health in Africa. Two main groups came together, IMFAR, who is the International Autism Society, and the South African Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or SAACAPAP, here in South Africa. We have at this conference about 300 participants from more than 25 countries, mainly African countries, but that's an incredible number of countries come together around autism research, around child and adolescent mental health research. With me is Professor Naufal Gadoua from Tunisia. The two of us are the main organizers of this event. Naufal, why are you particularly excited about this thing that has finally happened?
It's the first time that we have an autism conference in Africa, but also it's probably the first Pan-African conference on child adolescent mental health that is taking place on the continent. So this is very exciting for us. And in my quality of the current chair of the African Association for Child Adolescent Mental Health, I think this is an accomplishment for us to have this conference on the African continent. So thank you for doing that.
So what I'm not sure you know is we actually have about 300 registered people from, when we counted, more than 25 countries. And I think that's remarkable, don't you think?
That's wonderful. I mean, it's, and if I just remember all the recent statistics, we have people from Africa, but also from the neighboring country, from Gulf region, from India, which is very stimulating for us. And I think this is the time that we need really to take advantage of this, enthusiasm to build things for Africa and for African children.
I mean, and I think the other dilemma for us in Africa is not only are the clinical needs incredibly significant, and we have so little services for children and young people with mental health, neurodevelopmental disorders, there's incredibly little research that has been done. And I think for me what was really exciting is we actually had over 150 abstracts submitted for people who are starting to do research, beginning to go down an academic endeavor in a way in our continent. I mean, how do you see, particularly in your part of Africa, the northern part, how do you see things developing in terms of research in child and adolescent mental health?
I think we always have this problem of people doing some research but never publishing it or not making it visible. And preparing, for example, for our joint talk here about research about autism in Africa, the problem for us is we have a lot of what we call grey literature, people who keep their dissertations unpublished or just, don't take the time or the effort to make the research visible to others, which is a very important, barrier to our visibility around the world. And talking about autism in particular and children's developmental problems, I think having another point of view from Africa, from developing countries, is very important because we see things in a different way and we don't have the same reality on the ground.
1 in 5 children are at risk of having a mental health problem. In the whole of the continent of Africa, we have about 60 child and adolescent psychiatrists to service the whole of the continent. We have fewer child psychiatrists in the continent of Africa than there are in the city of Stockholm, for example. And I think it means for us, number one, the needs are vast, the resources are very limited, but it means that we have to think differently about how we meet the needs of people with all sorts of child and adolescent mental health problems, including autism. I'm here with Dr. Matlala Mabeba. Matlala, in the whole of Africa, we have about 60 child and adolescent psychiatrists, and about 40 or 50 of them are in South Africa. So you're one of a rare breed of child and adolescent psychiatrists on our continent. I mean, how does that make you think about child and adolescent mental health needs, and how are we ever going to meet that?
I just actually sometimes feel overwhelmed because the population is big. And I don't know. I don't even know if I think I'll make a difference, but I'm going to try. But it's very, very hard to reach people. And I thought, I want to go preventative way. Because I was seeing a lot of adults. And I thought, no. Maybe we should prevent these problems. Maybe we should see children before this problem starts. But I can tell you it's the hardest thing to do. Because I realized as I was seeing the children that in actual fact, by the time we see them, sometimes it's too late. Sometimes they don't even seek help until very late. So it's a mammoth task. It's very difficult, lots and lots of challenges, especially in our country where we don't have services. Yeah. I actually realized that research is actually, I think we should start there. And I learned that, it's not only our problem, because I met a lot of African colleagues. In actual fact, I think we're from 16 African states, if I'm not wrong. So I learned we're not the only ones, and I felt a bit consoled because they had worse situations than we were. I actually got exposure, and I think research, well, with us here, it's still very limited, but there is something happening. I really think research is quite important for us to see what are the needs, where can we correct things, where can we sort out things.
I think the risk is that people see research as something that is separate from the clinical activity and the clinical endeavor. And what we've really tried to do, particularly with this conference, is to bring those two together. We're talking about clinical research that has a direct relevance on people's lives, that will make an impact now. The challenge for us in Africa is the clinical needs are so vast. How do we help people to build research into that? Because if we only do clinical work, we might never build a knowledge base that we need to grow whatever it is on our continent.
I know my mentor back home always talks a lot about that because we tend to get engrossed in clinical work. But what we try to do is to see every program we have, like every clinic, most of our clinical work, we try to build in a research, some research program into it, even if it just means collecting data about patients, of course with ethical approvals and all that. So once we start a new clinic, a new service, we try to collect some research data about it. And then another thing we try to do now is to have like research meetings, regular research meetings every week, so that we encourage each other, So we have different projects we're working on, so that we talk about them, we give feedback on the progress, and then having like a research-free day in the week. Because like in my center, we have clinics of every day of the week. But now we're trying to free one day. So we know that day is our research day, and we can work on the different projects we have on that day. So I think that's what's been helpful.
Even though most people who have child and adolescent mental health problems, who have autism, live in low and middle income countries like in Africa, most research comes from high income countries. So 90% of people live here, but only 10% of research and skills come from here.
Can we deliver?
None of this meeting would have been possible if it wasn't for the support and in fact the shared vision from two main organizations. The first is the International Society for Autism Research, who decided rather than, or they realized that the big international meetings are usually in high-income countries, and so the people from low-income countries typically can't get there. And so the idea of a regional international meeting for autism research came from them. I'm here with Dr. Geraldine Dawson, who is the past president of IMFAR, and IMFAR is the International Association for
Autism Research.
Thank you, Jerry. That's a great one. The first thing to say is Jerry was really instrumental in making this regional IMFAR conference happen in Africa. And Jerry, firstly, thank you for making this happen. Why did you think that it's important to start regional IMFARs, and why did you think it was so important for us to bring one to Africa?
Well, let's start by thinking about what the title of this organization is, International Society for Autism Research. And we know that autism is a global challenge, and yet in many parts of the world there are very few researchers, very few providers, and yet the need is great everywhere. So we decided as a society that we would try to reach out and bring people from all over the world into the autism community by providing expertise in the area of research, training, and just allowing people to collaborate and get to know each other. And we do have an annual meeting. It's typically held in North America, sometimes in Europe, but many people around the world can't come. It's just too far away. So we looked around the world at places where we thought people probably couldn't come to the United States for a conference. And we said, let's have a conference there. And so it's really our pleasure to be able to hold a conference here and to be able to meet our colleagues in Africa and to develop collaborations and share information and expertise.
The other main organization who shared our vision and supported us with funding is Autism Speaks, who are an American non-profit organization for autism. And both those organizations really understood when we said, we want to bring an international quality conference to Africa. We want to use your funding to support young people to come to the conference. And remarkably, we asked all our international senior speakers to pay their own way, and they all did.
I think the main reason I'm excited is because I think there's opportunity to learn for all the stakeholders involved. As you know, a majority of autism research been conducted to date has been done in high-income countries, mainly Western Europe and North America. And as a result, we really don't know very much about how to best support our community in places like South Africa. So for me, this is an opportunity not only to disseminate information, but also to learn about how we can be more helpful to the community, the scientists, the families, and individuals affected by autism as well. The main thing I want to learn is, number one, what are the priorities here? What are the needs here in the community? The challenges, many of them are similar. Capacity, not having enough people providing services. Awareness is certainly an issue. But there are other things like cultural issues, right? We had some discussion this morning about how among certain members of the community, they still believe in that the child is possessed, right? And so those are, I think, are more unique challenges here in South Africa, even Sub-Saharan Africa in general. But because of that, I think the solutions, we need to be sensitive to these issues and try to adapt them so that they really speak to the challenges here specifically.
There are strategies that you're developing that are helping us to reach people who have no access to professionals, very little in the way of research, and bringing those strategies actually back home to the United States, where we, in fact, have areas where there's low resources. So it's very much a sharing of information where we're learning as much from the folks in Africa as hopefully that they are learning from us.
I have no doubt that we're going to learn a lot of things about autism and child mental health in Africa that will be relevant to the rest of the world. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. One, I've already said there are so few mental health experts in Africa. There are so few people doing research, which means we have to think differently. We simply cannot think in the same way that we've always thought. So we have to innovate. We innovate in Africa not because we think it's an interesting thing to do, but because we have to. That's why we're thinking, how can we use parents? How can we use untrained professionals? How can we use technology? How do we reach people remotely with telemedicine and other kind of methods? Because we have to. And I think we're going to learn and develop new tools, new techniques, new interventions here that other parts of the world that also have low resource environments, that also struggle to meet people's needs, can learn from. I think we're going to learn about new methods to identify people. I think we're going to learn about new things and new ways to intervene and give treatment and support to families. We didn't focus so much on genetics and biology, but also Africa is a very unique continent from a genetic point of view. Everybody knows that Africa is the kind of root of where human civilization came from. And so Africa also has a very unique genetic population, and I think we might learn some very interesting fundamental biological things as well.
10 years ago, I very confidently wrote, autism is 80% heritable, and was completely convinced that really this was just a universal finding. And it is since starting to work in African settings that I realized, well, actually all that research on heritability, twin studies, genetics, is based on research in high-income settings. We literally don't know if autism is as heritable in South Africa or in Ethiopia or in the Sudan because we don't have any data. So this is just one example of heritability, but I think this applies much more widely, that a lot of what we know about autism, what causes it, the cognitive correlates, are based on research primarily in North America and Europe, and then a bit in high-income Asian countries. And this quite possibly skews our knowledge, and I think we need to address that.
You're here in particular at this conference also as a mentor to the next generation of young child and adolescent mental health workers. How excited and optimistic do you feel about the growth that's happening in our continent?
Very optimistic, actually, very excited, and I feel an urgent need. Like, ultimately, I love this work. Please let me do it until I retire. But ultimately, I should be made superfluous. I should not be the one who constantly leads this. This needs to be taken on by Ethiopian experts, by South African experts, by Kenyan experts, who are already very nicely leveling with me and telling me, no, that idea that you're having is really rubbish in our context, let's do it differently. But that needs to grow further. And I'm very excited to work with the group of people here, and I see a great future for that. And I think it's essential, so it cannot continue to be a kind of high-income focused endeavor. It needs to come from a much wider group of African experts.
I think one of the big differences that we've heard about here at this conference also is in many high-income countries, the whole culture is a very individualist one. So people might think about an individual or a nuclear family. In Africa in particular, we are much more talking about communities. There are these kind of common concepts of, it takes a village to raise a child, community-based working. Ubuntu is a kind of a Southern African word that we often use.
Olayenka Omigbogbun from Nigeria, that was the past president of YACAPAP, used to say that they are not only low-resource countries, they are also different resource countries. And treatment care in child and adolescent psychiatry, it is also the whole society, the family, the teacher, everybody. It can be as efficient as many medication. And so, in fact, some low and middle-income countries have different resources and can have high resource for the treatment of child and adolescent.
Traditionally, very little research is done in Africa on child and adolescent mental health and autism. And I was incredibly impressed when we received over 150 abstracts. So an abstract is somebody submitting something that they would like to present either at a conference as a talk or as a poster. Now, we were really keen to give as many young people an opportunity to present. And a poster is a great format for that. Increasingly, around the world, if you go to international conferences, people present posters. So a poster is a big display of a short summary of a piece of work that you've done. We deliberately found a nice venue for our posters. We deliberately identified poster prizes, really as a way to encourage young people to submit and come and present their work. And we had almost 60 posters. That's an incredible number of poster presentations at an African conference like this. And I have absolutely no doubt that those poster prizes will really have enthused people, and those winners of the poster prizes will go away and never forget how much value there can be in making and presenting a poster at a scientific conference. To build capacity in research in child and adolescent mental health in Africa is not a one-off event. So if you ask me what I would really like, I would like to think that this will not be a single event that stops, but that this will be the start of that growing tree that we use for our logo very deliberately, so that we can not only have research discussed now and everyone go home and forget about it, but that it can really become part of a process of growth around child and adolescent mental health and autism in Africa.